What's up, guys? So today, today we're going to answer some of your guys' questions, and we're going to start with Robert Corcoran 6850. These are questions and comments that I felt like I needed to address, just so you know they're not necessarily questions. And Robert says using an app to measure pink noise would only tune your speakers to your phone's microphone, which I imagine would be very mid-focused. So, while he is right, that doesn't exactly work that way. First of all, if the microphone were hypersensitive to mids, what would end up happening is you would end up with a tune that had a scooped mid. So if you've got a microphone that is really sensitive to mids, right, it's going to tell you there's way more mids than there should be in your sound, which means whenever you level that out, your mids are going to wind up being, in actuality, slightly scooped. Thing is, we tend to like that sound anyway. So if that was the case, you would still result in a tune that was pleasing to the ear. However, the thing you got to know about phones, tablets, all of these things is they all have a digital audio processor. They have a DSP in them. And that DSP's job is to, well, one of them is to handle the incoming audio signal and to make sure that it is a reasonably flat signal with no peaky spots in it. Because the last thing you want is to be talking to your buddy on the phone and having an annoying spike whenever they have a specific frequency that they hit. It would make the whole thing sound like garbage. So the microphone is actually tuned up pretty flat. The second thing is the audio system itself. The output audio is also DSP'd. Everything below about 100 hertz falls off real hard because those little drivers in there, amazingly, can produce pretty low notes. And I'm still blown away by how small and how good they are at playing fairly low bass notes. But they can't produce much below 100 hertz. They just fall apart. So that DSP both handles outgoing audio and making it roll off so that it doesn't try to reproduce 40 or 30 or 40 hertz, and also flattens out the incoming signal from the microphone, as well as doing noise canceling. And if you guys are listening to this audio right now, I am recording this over Bluetooth from this headset onto my phone. So I'm using the headset's microphone and the headset software to cut noise out, because if I didn't, it would be very, very noisy in the background. And the phone itself is bypassing its normal microphone. But that doesn't mean that its microphone won't record a nice flat signal. So, yes, he's right, but it doesn't really cause the issues that you would expect. Next up, we have Rob Ezo 1436. And he is asking about, he says, how about some CAE stickers or maybe shrink wrap coming soon? So I looked into shrink wrap. And about the cheapest I can get shrink wrap made for $1 a piece. All right. I also looked into making my own shrink wrap. To make shrink wrap, I could actually use on an alt gauge cable. The machine is somewhere between $500 and $900. They're not cheap. So probably not anytime soon. Stickers, on the other hand, I don't know. I didn't look into those, but maybe. We'll see. And Miles Bachelor 8747. This guy comments a lot. He's a very cool guy. He says, just wondering, How much airspace would you lose if the subs were inside the enclosure? And we're talking about my subs where I've got them mounted magnet out or inverted mounted. Um, he's wondering how much airspace would that change if I mounted them inside the box where the motor structure and all is inside instead of outside. Well, when you look at it, it looks like you would gain and lose quite a bit going from inside to outside. In actuality, there is a number. Most subwoofers have an enclosure, have a number that tells you how much volume the subwoofer takes up in an enclosure. In actuality, it's usually between 0.25 and like 0.4 of a cubic foot. So if you figure, say 0.3, right? You figure 0.3 and you invert one sub. So now you go from losing 0.3 to not losing 0.3, plus you have a little bit of a cone area inside. So you're actually gaining like overall like 0.35, something like that. And that's per sub. So when you add all that up, you're looking at gaining well over 2 cubic feet of airspace when you're doing 4 subs. It's quite a bit, but just inverting or just taking the sub out, it's like between a quarter and a third of a cubic foot on a 12. So rough numbers. All right, next one is Niles Hudson 2185. I wanted to ask this question. What do you use as a test tone? Sine wave or regular test tone? And what's the difference between both? I use both, a sine wave and a pink noise track. First of all, let me explain why you choose pink noise. White noise is very tweeter heavy. So white noise is the same thing as pink noise. It's that same kind of a sound, but it has a boost in the tweeter department. Brown noise is the opposite. It has the same fuzzy sound, but it's got a boosted bottom end. Pink noise, on the other hand, is pretty much a flat noise track. And you use that, the pink noise, for getting your equalizer to where it's mostly like this. Now, when you start out, your equalizer may look like this. You got a big, huge gap right here and a big old peak over here. You don't want that, okay? You don't necessarily want it to be dead flat, but you want it to be like, kind of like this, right? If you've got a peak here, you want the other ones to come up there and kind of ramp up to that peak and you want to kind of create a smoothish curve. If you want a valley, you want to create a smooth valley. If you want a hump, you want to create a smooth hump. You don't want any outliers poking up or down. And whenever you're doing that, you want to EQ things down, not up. Up is your last resort. So if you've got a whole bunch of bands and then you've got a big hole right here, right? Then you got more bands here. You don't want to bring this up. You want to bring these and these down until you get them level. So you want to always EQ down if possible. Now, if you've got a spot that after you've EQ'd everything down and it's just not wanting to, hit the hammer, you can go up, I usually say try to limit yourself to 5 dB. So if you're looking at your scale on the side of your EQ, don't go up past 5. And usually you're fine. Oh, sine wave. So for sine wave, I use that for positioning sound and also for testing crossover points. So I'll use the sine wave on a slow up old sweep. I'll control the sweep with my fingers so I can bring it up higher and higher and higher. And when I'm setting my subwoofer, when I'm starting out with the subwoofer, I have the roll-offs off on the subwoofer. It's full range. And then I play a sine wave starting at like 20 hertz. And as you start playing 20 hertz, then 21, 22, and you're sliding it up, you'll start to hear the subwoofer come in, right? It'll be pretty much gone, and all of a sudden, somewhere between usually about 20 to 25, it'll start to really come in, and you can use that to set a subsonic filter to keep your sub from playing lower than what you can hear it play. But that withstanding, you keep continuing on with that bass note, you getting louder, when you're listening to it with your ear, right? And whenever you hear it peak, it'll probably peak around 50 or so, 40, between 40 and 50 hertz. It'll start to peak. At about 60 hertz, they tend to start dropping back off again. Usually by 80 hertz, your sub is pretty much out of gas completely. But it depends, because different boxes and different subs are going to have slightly different ranges they're capable of playing. But I just use my ear, and whenever I hear it fall a pretty good bit, that's where I put my crossover at. Then I bring in my next driver to catch that next, that next crossover point. That's what I use peak noise and the sine wave for. Thank you, Niles Hudson. Let's see, is that the same one? Yes. Moving on to tools and things, 5539. Hi, CAE. Hi, tools and things. I want to ask about running multiple battery systems. I heard many different views, so I have one Bosch in the engine bay and two batteries Odyssey in the trunk. What will be the better way to connect the system? One wire from the battery to one wire front battery to rear battery, and one wire to rear from alternator to rear battery, or should I just run two wires from battery to rear battery, all AGM battery, all stock alternator? Also, running dual inputs into my 5200 watt amp, would there be a voltage difference in any way? Okay, so here's the nuts and bolts of that. There's a lot of different opinions on that out there, and unfortunately, that's pretty much what they are, is opinions. And my advice is also going to be opinion-ish, but basically, you can group any number of storage devices that naturally rest at the same voltage. That's the important bit. Well, now there's two important bits. One is that you can effectively charge them at their recommended charging voltage, and it's the same recommended charging voltage across the board. And also, all of them will rest at the same voltage across the board. Because what you don't want is something that's going to naturally rest at 12.9 volts and then more stuff in the same circuit that it's going to rest at like 12.5. Because what's going to happen is the resters at 12.5 are going to pull that one down to 12.5, which won't hurt these guys, but that one is going to be constantly getting taxed all the time. That battery is going to be pulled down all the time, and it's going to be bad for that battery. You can do that with a capacitor, though. If you've got a dozen batteries and you got a couple of capacitors that can hold charge wherever, because capacitors don't care what voltage they rest at, they just rest wherever the batteries do. And so that works totally fine. You just don't want to have two different chemical storages that rest in two different areas, whether it be lithium and AGM or whatever. As long as they all rest at the same voltage, everything's chill. As far as how you wire that, just consider how much power you're going to be moving over each section. If your alternator is, say, a 160 amp alternator, the most it's ever going to be able to push anywhere is 160 amps. So if you're running from your alternator to your front battery, the battery is not going to be trying to feed power back to the alternator, so you're only looking at 160 amps. You can probably run a single run of alt gauge, a couple of feet, 3 feet, and it'd be no problem. However, running from your front battery to your back battery, now you've got the potential for each of these batteries to send power back and forth, because you got the alternator trying to send power to this battery and the back battery, plus you got this battery trying to fill in rolls for the back battery. That's a lot of current getting transferred. So then you look at what you're going to power on the other end. So if you've got he said he had a 5,000 watt amplifier. So that's 500 amps at full tilt boogie, which is what we're going to wire for. 500 amps, I think 2 runs of good OFC copper alt gauge over like 15 feet, it'll be fine for 500 amps. That's the minimum. I might would run, yeah, that's what I would run. I'd run 2 runs of alt gauge. So you would run 2 runs of alt gauge from the front battery to the back battery. You could run a single run to the battery if you want to, and then whatever you do from your back battery to your amplifier. So just consider looking on the internet for a wiring gauge chart and know how much amperage you're going to pull, how far it's going to go, and then you can see what gauge wire you need to handle that much amperage for that distance. Once you've done that, you may have to run 2 of something or 1 or 3 of something. But then after you figure that out, you look at how much power each one of these wires is actually going to be pulling. Say you're running this, what I would recommend, which would be 2 alt gauge wires, and you're pulling 500 amps over those 2 alt gauge wires. You still have to fuse that wire, especially when you have a back battery and a front battery. So you would secure your alternator run to your battery well. You may not need to fuse that. It's up to you whether you do or not. By standards for competition, you have to fuse every wire within 18 inches of the power source that's protecting. So if that wire is technically longer than 18 inches, it needs a fuse in it, close to the battery as you can get it. I don't push that one because I get it. But from that battery to that back battery, you need to have a 200, I would say a 250 amp fuse on each of those wires right beside the battery. And then also again, when they get to the back, right beside that battery, right before you connect, 2 more fuses, 1 on each wire. Then you go into the battery. That way the wire is protected from both ends. If you only fuse the front and then the wire gets grounded somewhere in the middle, it's going to get power from the back battery and big fire. So you have to fuse both ends so that whenever the wire has a problem in the middle somewhere, it breaks connection with both batteries. Okay, that's the point in that. So yes, fuse the wire, not the amp. That's the other thing. So if the wire will handle it, which that's about what I would want to recommend, is 250 for each run of that. If you go higher than that, you're pushing your luck. But it is what it is. Those wires can handle a lot more power than that, but you can fuse it for the wire. Say for instance, like 300 amps, 400 amps per wire, but you're not going to be pulling anywhere near that much power. So why not fuse it a little lower, since it's not going to be needed to have a bigger fuse, and that way you're safer. If there's an issue, it's going to blow the fuse quicker. So there you go. Anyway, that's my story on that question. Next, armed Appalachian. Aren't they all armed? Is there an inexpensive budget DSP that doesn't totally blow? Some people have recommended a lot of DSPs. So one of the ones I would recommend, I don't remember the one this one guy recommended, but it was sounded like a pretty good deal. If you want to go inexpensive, is look up the DS18 and Orion and any number of those guys. You'll see what they're calling a DSP. That's a box with lots of little knobs on it, little screw holes, and maybe a little display on it. It's kind of a flat dude, lots of controls on top, little squiggly lines. Those guys, they work really well for DSP. They have pretty much all the functionality of about any DSP you're going to use, all the important stuff. Where they fall short is in usability. Oh my God. You're going to need to read that book and study the instructions. It's very difficult. Some of them are extremely difficult to use, and they're slow to work with. So you're going to save money big time, and as far as money goes, but you're going to pay for that savings and how slow and how awkward they are to stumble through. Having said that, you can stumble through it and get a good result. That can sound very good. The last one. Oh, armed Appalachian again. This guy. I didn't do that on purpose. I was just going through and looking for interesting questions. Would Bluetooth from a tablet or phone to a DSP be a clean and high quality enough signal for SQ type build? How would it compare to a CD and a head unit going through RCA cables? Just generally curious, but I'm going to guess it's not perceivable to the human ear. You're pretty much correct in your perception of the human ear. Most people don't realize that YouTube content doesn't play over 17,000 hertz. It literally, there's no information there. YouTube limits that they've rolled it off. So there's that. If you hear anything over YouTube music, anything over any YouTube stuff, you're not hearing any frequency over 17,000 hertz. How about them apples? Good times with that. All right, so Bluetooth be clean enough for SQ. Well, there's a couple of nuances in this question. By SQ, are you meaning for competition's sake or for your personal use? For your personal use, if it sounds good to you, it is clean enough. If you're competing, most of your competitions, they're going to want to, your judge is going to have a little pen drive. He's going to want to plug that into something. So, because he keeps all of his high-res music on that, you're going to need to provide something for him to plug it into. So, if you're just running a Bluetooth signal, it's not going to be real easy to be judged. There are options, but just letting you know, having a place to plug in a stick is going to be a big thing when it comes to a competition situation. As far as quality goes, man, there's a million mathers out there that have studied this whole concept to the end of time. I can remember listening to the Doobie Brothers' Greatest Hits on a CD in a 1995 or 96 Ford Ranger pickup. It was purple. Had a pretty cool stereo in it. And to me, it sounded absolutely amazing. Listening to those same tracks on a very good stereo system, the stereo system in my Tahoe was infinitely better than the one that was in the Ranger. The same thing with my Chevy pickup before I had this. Extremely high-end equipment, extremely high-end stereo. Even playing it off a FLAC file on a pen drive, I wasn't able to get, my ear wasn't able to hear that, what I remembered it sounded like. And the files I was playing were infinitely higher resolution than that CD was back in the day. And at the same time, listening to it over Bluetooth off of a streaming service, I couldn't tell the difference between the two of them. I couldn't tell you the difference between any of that. I'm sure there was, but I couldn't hear it. Playing with Amazon's normal streaming versus the HD streaming that I paid a lot more for. I couldn't tell the difference. playing with Tidal, their normal and their maxed out level, I couldn't tell the difference between the very basic Amazon streaming and the highest level of Tidal streaming. I'd like to say that I could hear a difference. I was paying for more. Honestly, I couldn't hear a difference. It all sounded the same to me. I think people are willing to pay more for something that they perceive to be a better quality, even if it's no different from the normal one. Like if you go to the store to buy a can of coffee grounds, you buy the generic, or do you buy the Folgers, or do you buy the awesome Mountain Eskimo badass stuff? And one is $2, one is $40, but can you taste the difference? If I lined them up to you and didn't tell you what they were, would you be able to pick out which one was more expensive than the other one? I think you would just be guessing. We perceive a value in something, especially if we pay more for it, then we will sense more value. We'll sense better quality, even though there may not actually be any. So I think your answer to your own question is accurate. And that is the last of the Mohicans. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this. If you did, be sure to let me know in the comments, and I'll be piecing together some more questions for another one day. And I like to find strenuous questions like these. So hopefully you guys enjoyed my channel. If you do, hit that subscribe button and leave comments and like and share, and be nice to your mom. If your mom's not around anymore, be nice to your wife or your sister or your neighbor. Be nice to your dogs and your cats and the delivery people. But you don't have to be nice to bill collectors. Peace, guys.